Our video today, we're going to be covering an exciting topic that a lot of people get like exposed to early but never really dig into, and that is shading. There's a second word in this title that we call value, and we have a lot of ideas attached to that word. But before we get too deep into this, I want you guys to know I'm excited to be back. And if you're joining me for the first time, thanks for joining. And the way that this works is be sure to say hi in the chat and make sure that I know that you're here. If you have ideas or questions throughout the live lesson, be sure to let me know. I want to cover exactly what you guys are hoping to check out. So the main thing when we're getting started here, just an overview of my materials. I have, I'm using a little bit darker pencil here, but you can use any type of pencil. And you might notice that this screen is a little bit darker. The reason I'm doing that is just because I need to be doing this in black and white so you guys can see all the lines that I'm making. So if there's ever any issues, please feel free to let me know in the chat so I can try to fix those as we go. But I want to just talk to you about shading real quick. Now, first of all, a lot of people are familiar with what is pretty typical when people start shading. They're like, oh, wow, I can lay down some stuff here. But the issue is that we're not used to being able to, like, this kind of looks a little scratchy here. So a lot of people use their finger and they can blend this stuff up. Hey, Lily. I heard Haley and Lily are watching, some of my relatives out there. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's nice to see you. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I appreciate you guys checking it out today. But what I want to point out is like shading is really, we want to make sure we get clear on what we're talking about. It's not just smudging this stuff apart. Okay, shading is actually more. It's the way that artists, especially in black and white, they can make something look 3D just with how light and dark something is. So let's just think about what we're talking about here. So we look at what most people think of. We think of light and dark as opposites. Okay? But artists have to think about what's in between light and dark. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Anything that is a light or a dark or in between is what we call a value range. Okay, so if we're doing black and white, like if we think of something that's really dark, the darkest of darks, that might be black. Okay, if we think of the lightest of light, we might think of white. But what I want you to think about too, though, is let's say that I take away this paper and I look at this this tabletop here. Can't really see it, but the thing is what if our paper was this color? Now we have comparison of like light in these grains of wood and then dark over here. If you start drawing on a dark piece of paper, thing is you might not be able, you can get even darker than what we think of on a white sheet of paper. So if you start on a white piece of paper, we can very rarely get to pure black, which is something to think about. All right, so we got Maggie in here. We got Kate. Thanks for joining. You guys are nice to stop by. I hope you guys enjoy it, and hopefully you have some pencils ready to go. All right, so what is a value range? Well, think of it like a ladder, okay? So think of the sun up here. Okay, the sun, even though we think of it as like yellow sometimes, well, those light rays are actually the closest we have to white light, okay? And that light comes down to us on Earth over here, okay? Now that light goes through outer space and it hits us down here, and it actually takes the light about, I think it's like 8 seconds to get all the way to Earth. Light goes really fast, but the light that is like coming through your window right now was made 8 minutes ago and it left the sun. So that's how far we are away. But what's unique about white light is that it actually contains all of the colors that we know. We'll cover that in a later version of this video. But this is the thing, is when we're talking about black and white, it makes it a little bit easier to think, okay? So this is our light source, okay? That's something to keep in mind, okay? Light source, and that could be a light bulb. In this case, it's the sun, right? So we want to make sure that we actually Sorry, I just want to make sure this doesn't shake for you guys. Okay. We want to make sure that our light source, we think about that in our head because that's how we use value, all right? And it's coming from one place. So these light rays are coming out and they're flying out of here at the speed of light. And then when they hit an object, they actually go there, like let's say this is the Earth, and then some of it gets absorbed, but most of it bounces off, okay? It bounces off in pretty much all directions, even if it's not a mirror. But the thing is that some of those light rays, let's pretend our eye is like right here, some of it's bouncing directly off of there into our eyeball. All right, my brother John is tuning in. Welcome, John. So this is the thing. We're focusing on how like our minds see the world around us. This might be getting a little crazy, but I want to just show you this. All right, so let's picture something. You guys have all seen the moon, okay? And you might think that the moon changes shapes, okay? But let's just pretend that this is the moon. And there's light coming off of the sun right here, okay? And it's hitting the moon in a straight line, all right? Now, since it's a round ball, on that day, this side is going to be completely light, and then this side is going to be completely black. Why is that? Well, let's look at where this light goes. Okay, if it's spraying out from here, it's hitting all these parts that's facing the sun or the light source. But as soon as like this light goes past it, notice that the light doesn't bend at all. Okay? It can't swoop back around and light up this area. And that's what's really interesting about light, is it only travels in a straight line. And that actually makes things really easy for us. If you were watching some of the other videos, you should think about like those lines that we're drawing from the vanishing point are just like rays of light. Okay, so I'm going to switch pages here and we're just going to go right into this thing. All right, so let's focus on something like a ball here, and we'll try to draw a ball using shading. All right, so here we go. I'm going to start off, and this is a little bit tough of an exercise, but I want to show you because it's the most satisfying. Okay, I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to pretend like there's a light source right up here, kind of in front of the ball, and it's shooting down, and if it hit like a laser, it would probably hit right about here. I'm just going to put a really light mark right there, okay? Now, right now it's just a flat circle, but we're going to try to make this thing turn into a sphere or a ball by using some shading. Now, this is just kind of a quick and easy way to start shading a ball, okay? And it's super fun, so bear with me. But I want you to draw very lightly. I want you to kind of picture, if we were to slice this ball in half, maybe it's like an orange. We're going to draw this line about halfway across and give it a curve right here, okay? And then slightly underneath there, on the opposite side, we're going to put another line in between like that, all right? I'm going to zoom in a little bit with my camera so you guys can see a little better here. Well, give me 1 second. All right. So let's pretend our light source is up here. It's this little thing, and it's beaming out some lines of light. All right, so let's picture where the light is going. It's going to go right here. If it went direct hit, it's going to hit right on this little dot. But it's also spraying light out at angles, right? It's going to hit right here, okay? It's also going to hit down here. If another line, it's probably going to be right here. It's all hitting in this area that's on the front half, just like the moon, okay? Going to hit right over here. And you don't have to draw these lines if you don't want to, but it's helpful to think about. I'm going to draw it right here, but what happens if the line like misses, right? That line keeps going into the background, okay? So it misses the back side. It's not looping back around, and that's actually really good for us. Same thing over here. It's going straight down and kind of missing it, okay? What we're going to do is start to shade the opposite. Since the paper is white, this is as bright as this side is ever going to get, okay? And we're going to leave this front half of the circle alone, We're just going to lightly shade in the back. Now, if you haven't done much shading, I want to teach you a technique. This is what I call, have you ever seen like Cruella de Vil in the 101 Dalmatians? Okay, she always holds that long like cigarette thing and she's always tapping it off to get the ashes off. I know it's kind of a strange reference, but I like to hold this, have a pose like this. I'm number one, right, like this. And then I just nestle my pencil right in here so it hits my palm and hold it like this. My arm is going to go back and forth from my elbow like this, okay? And to press down harder, it goes here, and I'll do some sample shading on the side. I'm going to sketch with the side of my pencil. I just slowly move it back. If I want it darker, I press down with my finger. So you can control it very easily. All right? All right. Excellent. So here we go. What I'm going to do is start to shade in, put one coat of shading inside of this little shape we've made. Okay, so I'm moving it side to side. Try not to press too hard. We can always try to erase. Okay? All right. So you see it almost looks like the shape of a moon. That's what we're looking for. All right. So what we've done is we've said to our viewer, right, who's looking at this piece, is there's some light here and it's hitting this front half of the circle, but it's not hitting that back half of the circle. Okay? Now what's unique about shading is that our eraser becomes a drawing tool. It can help us really easily clean up some edges. We're actually drawing with it. So if you kind of messed up, you can actually sharpen up the edge of the shadow very easily with an eraser. Now this eraser is kind of nice because it almost looks like a pencil, and I can actually press it out to make more. So the thing is this is a really nice way to do it. You don't have to have one of these, but if you're serious about your art skills, getting an eraser stick, you can get even skinnier ones or thicker ones if you want. That'll help you out. I'm going to erase some of those lines we drew, just as a reference. All right. Now if this ball was floating in space, this would be actually pretty good. This would be nice and dark, right? But what I want you guys to think about, let's say this ball is sitting on a table. Now, one other use for these lines that we drew from the light source, let's take a look. If I follow this one down right to the edge of this circle, and I go a little bit farther down, and then take this line out here, take it a little farther, okay? What this means is there's going to be a shadow on the table here, and we're actually going to try to draw a flattened kind of oval shape in between. Let's see what happens. Just sketching it out right now. But whenever I'm drawing something I'm not sure of, I just put it kind of light. Okay? And I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to shade this shadow in. Remember, I can always use my eraser to spice this up later. All right. So what I'm drawing is the shadow. So we have the light side here, but because the light can't get through the ball, it's casting a shadow over here. Okay? And this line can help us know exactly how far out. So if we know where the light source is, we can just kind of guess where it's going to be. So we've shaded here, but we haven't been very careful about how dark we're shading. And that, I see Kate is commenting moon face. This does look like a moon. We could put a little face on there. Timothy moon face over here. All right. So let's let's try to focus how dark or how hard do you press on your shading, okay? So I talked about a ladder before. I'm going to switch back to my other thing, okay? I'm just going to draw a little ladder here. So I'll put two lines like this, okay? And I'm going to put the top and bottom rung on there, and then I'm going to split it in half, and in half again, okay? And this is a good exercise to practice. You can do this while you're zoning out listening to your teacher talk. That's what I used to do. Don't tell them anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start filling the bottom one, I'm going to press really hard. I'm going to try to fill this in with black. So that's as dark as I get. That's my darkest dark, or what we could use as a shadow. Okay? And at the top, I'm going to leave it white. What I'm going to try to do in these two squares is come up with a gray that's like a step ladder all the way up to light. So the second step is going to be a little bit lighter. So I'm not pressing as hard. And that might be another step up the value range. And then this one, if we think about it, if we divide that in half, we need it even lighter, and it's on its way to white. So I got to make this nice and light. Okay, sometimes it takes a while to practice how hard you press. Okay, and then there's our pure white. But what you might notice is these grays are pretty close together. There's not much of a difference. So I'm going to put a second coat of shading on here to make it look a little bit different. Not quite as dark as my darkest dark. So can you see how we have four different things? So we have what we call our light. I'm not going to call it white. Okay, what I'm going to call it is a highlight. So those of you out there who might highlight your hair to get it lighter, think of it that way. It's something related to the sun. Okay, so highlight versus a shadow, but this black is going to be what we call our darkest dark. Okay, it's not black. We use darkest dark in our highlight. Okay, anything in between there. And if you want to sound like a real sophisticated artist, these are what we call mid-tones. Okay, think of the word mid, they're in the middle. And tones, if you ever think about this, like a tone is like kind of like this really soft and like, I don't know, in between type of feeling. It's kind of vague, right? You're like, I didn't like your tone. Whenever somebody says that, it's like kind of confused, or if you've heard in the gray area, that's what we like to think about when it comes to midtones. But what's cool about this, I won't do it right now, but if we could make a ladder that's really tall, so there could be a bunch of different steps in between. This is a very short value scale, but it's going to be helpful for us when we shade this thing in. I'm going to show you some really cool properties of light that make these things look really, really realistic. So let's go back to our sphere drawing, or should I say our moon face drawing. All right, and let's think about this, because the lightest light point is going to be right about at this guy's nose, okay? Because the light is hitting it perfectly on, that's the most intense light, and it's bouncing directly back at our eyeballs back here. So we're going to kind of leave that there. I'm actually going to use my eraser to make sure that it's nice and empty, okay? Now, at about midway through here, I'm going to put another really light separation. Picture this like one of those, like almost like a beach ball or one of those play balls. You see how I lightly did that? And what I'm going to put in right here is we're going to work our way down that ladder. Starting at white, this one is going to have this mid-tone in it. It's the lightest of the ones that we did. So I'm going to carefully shade. Remember not to press too hard. And if you kind of go over the line, it's no big deal. Remember, we have our eraser. If you see those lines too much, that's okay. I have a way to blend those things together. Okay, but what you should start to see is this is very bright. It's our brightest, it's our highlight. This is a mid-tone. But the thing where people actually get confused is they think, oh, well, then I got to work my way down the ladder, and I'm going to put that next step down here. But what's weird about, like, when we draw something like a ball is we actually have to think about the light around the object we haven't talked about. Okay, but I'm going to draw this darker first. So I'm actually going to go to my darkest dark and put that in this ring. I know we kind of like drew this first, this little line right here, but close to this halfway point, I'm going to actually put my darkest dark. Might seem odd that we have this darkest dark right up against this pretty light gray. Okay, so it's pretty dark in that ring, but we still have this little sliver of the ball here. Okay, and that is going to actually be our second to last step on the value scale, like this. I already put some shading in there, but I'm going to just make it a little bit darker right here. Now you might be thinking like, well, this isn't really shading because it's not a smooth transition. I'm even going to darken up this area for you. So that's my darkest dark. Okay, but I'm going to ask you to hold off just for now. Okay, now we have our light source here, but we're going to do the same thing for this shadow. But before we do, I want you guys to think about where this light, the stuff that isn't hitting the ball, where it's going. Now let's pretend that some of the light goes past it over here. Now believe it or not, it's not going to bounce off like a laser in one direction. It's going to bounce off pretty much in every direction. And that light, some of it is going to bounce back and hit the back side of this ball. Now in outer space, there's nothing for that light to bounce off of. But if it's sitting on a table, we're going to see, so this side of the circle is going to be slightly lighter, believe it or not, because that light over here is bouncing back in. But it's also creating an opportunity when we create the shadow is we're going to have the darkest shadow be closest to the circle itself. So I'm going to create these rings like this. Some of them right underneath. That's going to be our darkest. And our second, third, okay? So I'm going to shade right underneath here with my darkest dark, and you'll see how this thing will pop right out. Okay, can you see how this pops out real nice? Second of all, I'm going to just add this. This will be my kind of 3/4 one. It's going to be a mid-tone. And then this is going to be somewhat lighter. I think this needs to get a little bit darker. But I've drawn my steps in here. That's the key thing. Put a little bit of my darkest dark here. Okay. So I have this shadow that's slightly getting lighter until it gets farther away from the circle. Are you guys seeing how these steps of value are affecting how we see this? And I explained to you that some of this light that is missing the ball is bouncing back in and filling it over here. So what's really interesting to me is that the darkest dark is always right next to, like, we call, I think it's called the Hyperion of a shadow. Pretty advanced, but the thing is like, this is what makes this look pretty light, okay? Now, you might be getting concerned, especially if yours kind of looks scribbly like this. How are we going to get these things to blend together? Now, a lot of people, they get in the habit of using their finger to smudge these things. But, just like when we're thinking about washing our hands all the time, you know how your hands dry out if you wash your hands a lot? Well, that's because our body produces natural oil for our fingers to keep it from drying out. That's a really good thing for, you know, keeping nice soft hands, but it's really bad if we rub that oil into the paper. So we try to avoid that. And so what you can use in this case is going to be a tissue. So what I'm going to do is take any type of like tissue paper. You can use toilet paper, paper towels. Okay, I'm going to fold it up like this. Okay, you could even use like an old glasses cloth, you know, to clean your glasses. I'm trying to clean this stuff up. Okay, fold it up, and then I'm just going to twist from one end as hard as I can. And we're creating what we call a blending stump, okay? Sometimes I like to fold it over at the end, okay, like this. So it's kind of like a hard thing I can use to blend. I'm going to start with the lightest lights here, and I'm going to just use a circular movement to really just blend this thing, that lightest stuff in here, towards that light area, creating a soft transition. Notice how that's much more smoky now, right? When I go into my other areas, use that circular movement. What am I doing? First of all, I'm pushing some of the stuff around that's on the little teeth of the paper. Now, your paper is like, if you looked at it on a microscope, there's these tiny little teeth, okay? And they kind of like scratch off the graphite or whatever you're drawing with. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing this stuff deeper down into the paper, but I'm also smudging it to get rid of those little air pockets where it didn't go down into the tooth, okay? So I'm going to use that circular movement to really just blend it around. I'm just working to get all of those pencil strokes kind of mushed out. I don't want to see them as much, okay? So I've made this a little bit softer, okay? And I'm going to start cleaning up, okay? Because you can see that I smudged a little bit over the line. But what I'm going to do is, with my eraser, I can really clean this thing up and create a hard edge there. Erase some of the lines I drew. I'll just take some of these away. But if you feel like you're having trouble seeing yours work, we might still have to do some adjustment. And this is when I'm working on drawing a portrait, okay, I have to do a lot of adjustment even after I shade it in for the first time. So what am I going to do here? It looks like I need to add a little bit more darkness in this transition. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of my pencil about halfway in between here. Just to make it a little darker. It can look a little messy. Just don't use the tip of your pencil. See, I'm using the edge. And I'm going to go back in with my blending stump, circular movements, and see if I can make a smoother transition. I'm making another step in between those grays. And I might work a little bit more up towards that light spot or the highlight. Starting to see that transition. I'm following that shape. But then, since this is getting a little washed out, I might actually add a little bit more shading here on the darker side. I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick too. You might not have one of these at home, but I'm going to show you one of my favorite drawing tools, and that is my Kneaded Eraser. I'm just going to have to grab it real quick. Okay. Now, a kneaded eraser is like a piece of clay almost. I don't know if you can see it very well here, but I can pull it apart and it's kind of sticky. But with a normal eraser, you have to move it around a lot. So see how it's like pulling apart? The nice thing is I can create like this type of eraser. All I have to do is actually put it down and it'll pull off the material. It'll lighten it up. So it's kind of sticky. And I don't have to like smudge some stuff around. All right. So I can also, let's say I want to lighten up just that little sliver on the other side. I can turn this thing into kind of a sharp edge and roll it over into that space. And I'm just pulling up just a little bit of what I put down to lighten it up. You see how much more control I have there? So if I needed to just adjust, see how there's a little smudge here. What if I wanted to just pull that out? This is just a great way to clean up some of the things that I mess up and adjust if this got too dark. So looks a little too dark there. There we go. So I want you guys to just know about some of these tools. So if you ever go to the art store, this is a great way to do it. I'm also feeling like this part is a little dark. We have a light one over here, but I'm going to make another layer here. And if you don't have one of these erasers, no worries. You can still use your eraser lightly. So if you have something like this, I can almost like lightly sketch that stuff off, lightening it up. I'm going to lighten it up back here a little bit. If you start to see your eraser lines too much, you can hit it again with your smudge stick. Okay. Notice I also get in the habit of using the tissue to wipe away my eraser markings, because you'll notice that as you work, if you use your hand, those same oils we don't want to put in there from smudging can start to get onto your paper and they cause a lot of problems. Okay. So we've done some pretty cool shading here. And the final touch, I'm just looking for ways I can clean up the edges. And since this part of the line, this is what we call a lost edge, I'm going to take the part that's closest to that line, the bright point. I'm going to just lighten it up a little bit. And you're going to see that that thing looks a little bit more, it's almost like that edge is almost lost in space, but our mind kind of fills it in. So the beauty of this is that you can really get into the subtlety of the shading. And you could spend hours just perfecting this, but again, this is kind of a good point for our circle to end. So those of you who are still watching, I'd love to hear if you want to hear like a specific shape or form you want me to do, or even if it's like an object that we can practice our shading on, or if you have questions on, say, like a texture or something like that. I'd love to hear your suggestions of what we should do. So overall, I think we're pretty much set on this. And we can move on to another object. Okay. Now, one thing I want to point out, though, before we jump into a new shape, think about where this light is coming from. What if all of a sudden we shifted this light and we put it over here? That's going to change where the shadow is going to be. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Our light point is going to be over here. So it always depends on where your light source is coming from when you're shading things. Okay. So we're getting a request for Spongebob. That actually would be kind of fun. Maybe we can do a Spongebob drawing and like look for opportunities to try our shading stuff, because he is kind of like a box. Okay. So I'm gonna actually pull up a picture of Spongebob real quick. And let me get a fresh sheet of paper here. Any other requests? Maybe what is Spongebob going to be doing? We could also like, Patrick might be kind of a cool shape to do as well, because he's kind of like a soft shape. All right, so give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up a picture of Spongebob, maybe on my phone. Okay, so what I do know about Spongebob is that he has square pants, he has a square body. So we're going to set up a similar situation, and we're going to put our light source in the same spot, right up here. It's going to be slightly in front of our Spongebob, okay, and we will focus on shading him appropriately. So I found this picture. I don't know if you can see that. And the artist used some shading here, but this will be a really cool way to practice our shading. Okay, so first off, the basic shape of the Spongebob that we see is kind of this square. I'm not going to worry about those wiggly lines yet, but I am going to try to get the basic shape of him. Starting off with what looks like a parentheses, because he's kind of bent. See how he's bent over here? And then the top of his head is just about straight across. And then another one of those parentheses shapes. Parentheses facing up this time to get the top part, and we'll kind of create the back side of him. It kind of curls over. And notice how the bottom of his shorts are actually, they're facing down because he's almost like turning. We'll bring this line down straight, and we'll put a line across for his pants here. Another straight line, continue, and then a line across like that. So you can see his basic shape here. We'll wait to do his eyes and stuff. But then we'll do just kind of a little rectangle for his pant leg. And his legs go at an angle like this. I'm just drawing one line that's parallel. Nice and skinny. And his shoes are pretty small, but I'm just going to sketch them in. Not going to focus on the detail too much. Okay. All right. His arms are on the lower half of this part. I'm going to just draw this shape that's almost like an arch for his sleeve. And then a line going straight out to the side. Okay, I'm just going to put a little ball here for his hand. I'm not going to add the fingers yet. Same thing, but I can't see the sleeve as much, so I'm going to put a little thing to show the sleeve. An arm out here. Notice how his hand is like basically in line with the bottom of his shorts, so I'm going to put this little ball right there, just for now. And then I'm just going to lightly sketch in where some of his facial features go. His eyes, it's kind of like ovals towards the top. And notice how this one eye kind of overlaps with the other one. Okay. And then his mouth, I'm noticing that this line, this edge of his mouth is almost in the middle of his face. It's almost directly under, but it's about right here. I'm going to draw a line like this. And the top corner of his mouth is almost, you put like this little egg shape right under his eye. And it's going to go down to scoop out this little swerve. And then we're going to draw a line curving up to the corner of his mouth. And his nose starts right in between those two eyes. So we'll just put this out here for now. It's a pretty loose shape. I'll put his pupils in, I guess. They're slightly to the right, looking at us. And we'll just place these little eyelashes in for now. And then his two front teeth. Alright, so we have some good stuff to start with. But like in this picture, let's turn this off for now. I want you guys to think about this. Imagine if this is our light source. It's slightly in front of him, so it's going to hit like at an angle. The front of his body is going to be light. But when we think about our value scale, let me just make one real quick over here. The bottom is going to be our darkest dark, which is pure black. This is going to be our mid-tone, a dark mid-tone and then a light mid-tone. Maybe I need to make this one a little darker. Make this even darker here. Right? So we have 4 values. Okay, so value would be anything that is light to dark instead of colors. We're using values here. But we have another issue here that's kind of interesting. Okay, so the sponge itself is yellow, but his pants are like a brown, right? So the thing is, should we go, if there's a shadow on this side and it's a lighter color like yellow, should we use the darkest dark? Probably not. I'm going to use this one here. Maybe this one. I don't know. We'll see. We'll start with this one on this side that's not getting any light. So I'm going to lightly shade that in. Okay. Now even his shirt, I'm going to shade in here and this arm because it's kind of hiding behind here. But then I'll shade this portion of his pants down as well. But notice that we don't see, like this is a different material. This is our sponge area. This is the pants and the shirt. So if you look closely, you can see his shirt kind of separates again. And we have this little 2 triangles for the collar. And then his tie. I'll show you the picture again. It's harder to see. This tie is more of a shape that goes over the pants. Okay. And for now, that's going to be good. But notice that this is like brown, this is white, and the value of the sponge is actually darker than the shirt. So the shirt is the only thing that's pure white here. So we have to save our pure white for that. That means we might have to shade in the yellow part just a little bit. So I'm going to do that actually. His eyes are going to stay white. Okay. Then we're going to make this slightly darker because it's in a shadow. So I'm going to put a second coat on. We know that the shorts are going to be darker than this shadow, so I'm going to darken this and add a second coat. Okay, and then use basically this value to shade in the front of the pants that are getting some light, but it'll show that it's a little bit darker than the shirt itself. But this should be darker than the front of the sponge, right? So we have a little bit of value going on here, and we can tell that the light is hitting the front of him and not this side that's hidden from the light. Okay? So if we go back in, we also notice that there's some shadows inside the mouth. So what the teeth are nice and bright. So we'll leave those completely white. But we're actually going to shade behind the teeth into that mouth. We'll get that one coat of kind of like a darker mid-tone first. Not going all the way black there. I forgot to draw the tongue, so I'm going to draw like a parenthesis here. And where it overlaps, I'm going to put another one. I'm just going to draw in where that mouth goes, and I'm just going to shade in behind it. Now if you look closely, I don't know if you can see it on this particular one, there's a shadow on the tongue that's being cast by the mouth up here. So we'll shade this area like this. But when I was talking about adjusting things, like I know that this deep hole in his throat, right, that's going to be one of the darkest darks because it's really no light is possible to get in there. So back towards the edge, that's going to be the darkest dark. And I'm going to darken up this area too, just to make sure people know that that's going to be the mouth. So you can see we've created this amount of depth that helps us see that this thing is like actually seeing into his mouth. Okay? Now, on the other things, I don't know if you can see it on this particular one. If you zoom in closely on these holes, okay, they're an oval, but then there's a little shadow of the inside shape there. So let's try to do one of those right next to his mouth there. So I'm going to draw an oval first, and I'm going to shade that in slightly darker. But then on the inside left edge, I'm just going to shade part of a shadow that makes it look like it's almost like a hole or something that's pressed back into him, right? There's another one down here. So shade it in a little darker. And then on the left edge, right? Because why is that? The light is over here. It can't get to that edge, right? So those little depressions or little holes in there are going to help us a lot. Now what we didn't do is put those wavy lines in there. So let's try to do something like that. I'm just putting a wavy line instead of a straight one on all of these. You can start to see how this is taking a pretty good form. But if you notice, this is a pretty dark picture here. So I'm going to shade one more coat on this shadow side. That also means I got to put another coat on this dark area, make that even darker. So can you see how this looks much brighter on this side? Let's finish up with a few more of these little ovals to make them look like a sponge. I got one here. I got to shade that in a little darker. Another one like this. So I'm shading in light, and then I'm putting a dark shadow around the top left edge. So this shading stuff works at a really small scale too, right? One up here, and then one at the top. One at this side. Can you see how much those pop out? It really does look like a hole in that sponge. He's got a few on this side, but we might have to make them a little bit darker. Uh-oh. I think my phone is freezing. Here we go. You can't really see them on this one, but I'll show you on the drawing. I'm going to start here, but their shadow's on the top right side. Not exactly sure why, but I'm still going to make them darker than this shadow side. Still adding that dark shadow. But we're having all sorts of fun with this. So even for a cartoon, you do see some of this shading. It tells us how something is a little bit more 3D in space. Okay? So let's go back to some of the shapes here. What you'll notice is that this line, well, let's wait till we do any of the line work here. But what I'm going to do is start outlining some of the shapes like around his sleeve there, but I want you to notice this shadow on his sleeve, right? So we might need to use our eraser. I'm going to draw in the outline of the shape with a dark line. That's more of a cartoon style. And I'm going to use my eraser now to draw in a lightest light on this left edge here, and then shade half of it a little bit darker. Still feel like we need to make this shadow side darker, so I'm going to put another coat on. All right. And then I'm going to draw the arm in a little bit more. Okay, let's go back to the eyes. We'll outline those, try to get them good. So this left eye goes around and it stops where it hits this part of the eye. So it sort of overlaps. And there's a line here for this little egg shape where his mouth goes together. So I'm drawing the outline of the mouth now. Then I can draw the nose, kind of sweeps upward a little bit. And we'll draw his pupils. So they're slightly to the right. Here's an outline. And there's a little black pupil in there. Shade that in darkest dark. And then we'll put the pupils maybe as like a slight thing here. Can you see on the edge of his eye though that there's some shading because it pops out a little bit? Let's put that kind of moon-shaped shadow. Doesn't have to be too dark, but it'll help those eyes look a little bit more 3D. Let's look at his nose. On the underside of his nose, there's a shadow as well. So I'm using circular movements here to shade that in, just because it's nice and small. And even where it hits like his mouth here, there's this little oval shaped shadow, or half of an oval. Okay, look at this one under his lip. We have this one line here, but then we have a line of light and then a dark kind of moon-shaped wedge here. So I'm going to start off by drawing a shape like this, and then drawing that moon-shaped wedge right there, and I'm going to shadow that in. That's going to make it look like his lip isn't just that line. It's got some depth to it. It makes that bottom of the mouth pop out. So the question that I'm getting from Joe is, how do they get that white spot on the eye? That's a great question to make it look sparkly. So what we can do is use our eraser. We might have to actually kind of redo some of the stuff, but on the top left part, I'm going to try to just erase a little bit larger than I have to. Try to get it back to white. I should have thought of that before. Now it looks like we ruined our drawing, but if you zoom in on these little white spots, they're right in between the black and the shadow up here. So let's try to do that. Hopefully you guys can see. I'm going to leave a little white circle. So I'm going to finish here. I'm going to draw that white circle in. And then I'm going to put kind of like a dark moon shape instead of a circle. So it looks like a reflection. So good observation, Joe. So it looks a little bit better. I think we could probably put another shadow on the underside here of this, what would be the iris. It's a little bit darker. Another rule of thumb is if you want something to look bright, you got to put it next to something that's very dark. Okay, so what we did with the teeth here, to make those pop out, let's try to do that same trick. I'm going to make the back of the mouth really dark so it pops out those teeth, so they seem like they pop out farther forward. All right, so looks like we're starting to get some good shading here. I think I missed one like this. But why don't we go at this thing with our shading stuff? And for this one, it's going to be a little bit weird because I'm going to blur the whole thing. I'm just going to go circular movements, getting a nice clean, well, I shouldn't say clean, but nice even value to this stuff. Everything is nice and smooth. But the reason I like doing this sometimes, as long as it doesn't get too dark, is because I can use my eraser as a drawing tool to clean some things up. Okay, so watch this. If I need a bright spot, again, I'll start with the eyes, pulling those to make it nice and bright. And then on the left side of the eyes, I'm going to start by making this moon shape like this. I want you to see how that almost looks like it's even more bright. So by smearing some of the things, I can create opportunities to draw with my eraser. Same thing with the bottom lip. I'm going to make that nice and bright. I'm making highlights to focus on things that I want to pop out. Let's try the top of the nose, because that's definitely getting some light. And then on the top edge, underneath that dark line, we're creating an even lighter spot. Same thing over up against this edge. We can kind of create some things along those wavy parts. Even on top of this little egg shape for his eye. And then under, like kind of above his nose here, we see, and on his lip, we can make a little brighter. And on the side of his mouth over here. See how it looks like those things are popping out much more? That's the beauty of shading. I'm going to start by lightening up where the shirt is. I might need to shade the pants a little bit more. Okay, but let's use our dark line for some outlining now. So there's a straight line here along his pants. And he has like these belt, looks like the belt is going behind the tie. We'll draw the tie in, keep that shape so it kind of overlaps with the shirt, his tie, and his collar. Okay, that's starting to pop out a lot more, but we're not just relying on line drawing anymore, we're shading. I'm going to put one more line here, but I am going to darken up the pants a little bit and darken them on this side as well. This line, the wavy one over here, might need a little bit of work, right, to show it. And then we can even not all of the line, but some of those wiggles we can darken up. It doesn't have to be all straight, but that helps it show that there's an edge there. I'm going to darken up this one more time. And if you can get the feel for this, I just want you to realize, like, this takes some going back and forth. You're comparing how light, how dark to make these things. So it's not always a straight line of progress. You have to go back and forth. Now let's finish up with the legs here. We haven't really spent much time on them. I need to fix the shape, I think, a little bit. They're more of like a bell bottom thing. I'll shade them with one coat first. And then I notice there's a shadow for overhanging underneath, right? It's the pants are overhanging, so I put this little moon slice here. Right? His legs, pretty much straight lines on both sides. That's kind of the cartoon style. And he has, looks like 3 lines here. Okay, and then simplify the shapes of the boot. So I'm starting off with an oval for the top, this little heel like this, a little line segment, and then almost like a ball to connect those two. There's one. Second one, very similar. An oval that stick goes into, a little heel, sharp corner, and then this little teardrop bulb shape. But I want you to think about this little white dot on there. That is a highlight, right? Even though it's a cartoon highlight, we're going to save that. And when I mean save it, I mean this thing's going to be almost completely black, but I'm going to draw an oval at the top of the shoes. That's going to be completely white. So when I shade these in to my darkest dark, I leave that white shape on there. So if you don't want to do like realistic drawing like a classical painter, but you want to do some cartooning, all of this shading stuff, especially the direction of our light source, really pays off. You got to stick with it and remember where your light is coming from to know where those little highlights or the shiny parts are going to be. Okay. Now his hands, let's take a look. He's only got a thumb and 3 fingers. But I'm going to start off with a light circle. I'm going to draw his thumb first. His finger. They're kind of like teardrop shapes, a little blobby. Try to divide them up. Okay, before I do any of the outlining, I'm going to go to his other hand. Looks like there's some shading we can get into later. I'm going to do his thumb first. Pointer finger. And then his other 2. Space them out. Okay. I use my eraser to get rid of those sketchy lines that I did for the palm. And I want you guys to pay attention. Think about how many lines that I drew that ended up getting erased. That's just part of it. Like any artist knows there's no such thing as like the perfect drawing from the first setup. We basically used all those lines, smudged them, erased them. There's no talk about being, perfect on the first shot. I want you guys to just get in the habit of knowing that like you're going to be smudging, erasing, moving things around and adjusting. That's all part of the game, okay? So let's go back into these hands real quick. We notice there's some shadows in there. So let's put some shadows on the left side to make it look round. I'm gonna be honest, like this guy wasn't paying attention to where the light source was on these hands. They should be on this side. So we'll fix that for him. So sometimes even artists get lazy, especially cartoonists. They don't want perfectly realistic things, but we do. Or at least things that follow good ideas about shading. We're going to put an outline around this, but it's not always necessary if you're drawing realistically. Okay, we'll do the other hand, and let's think about where the light is coming from. So on the opposite side, he's going to have shadows over here on the right side. And underneath, kind of. We'll outline that. I'll just make this arm a little bit stronger on the line. Okay, it looks like we need to lighten up our eyes a little bit more. Let's do that with the eraser. And let's put a little bit of kind of texture marks over here, just to lighten up some of his sponge area. And then we'll clean up this back side here to make it look a little bit cleaner. But I'm starting to like how this looks. So we used all these same techniques to shade this thing in. And it all comes back to this value scale. Now we made tons of different variations in between this darkest dark, which you see in the boot, right? That's way darker than some of these. But the way that I approach it is by putting several coats on to adjust as I go. So it would be nice, I'm sure, to think of this as like, oh man, I wish I could just get it right on the first shot. But as you'll find out, there's always like an infinite opportunity to make this thing like perfect. There's always something you can zoom in on. But if you focus on where the light is coming from, right? It's hitting the front part of his face, and we know it can't reach the back edge here. You're already off on your way, and you can just apply that every single time to just think about how the light interacts with what you're doing. Okay? So if there's not any other, questions, I think we covered a lot of ground here today, and I hope you guys found this productive. But be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you get every live lesson. We'll be doing this every day for as long as we're stuck inside. So like I said, every day at 3:30 Central Time, I'll be doing a live lesson. And I'm depending on you guys if you have suggestions or ideas for what I should cover. But I'll keep going, and there's always something you can learn. I've learned that as an artist working professionally. And again, I want to share. We got Joe, Kate, John, everyone for tuning in today. So I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at 3:30. And if you did any artwork today, be sure to post it on Instagram and then tag me. So if you look underneath my little face guy right here, my Instagram tag, Art with Anderson, there's little underscores in between. See if you can find me, follow me, and give me a shout out, and I'll be sure to feature some of your artwork in the future videos. So be sure to practice, have some fun with this, be easy on yourself. It takes practice. And if you think of somebody else that would love these videos, please feel free to share it with them. But otherwise, I will see you tomorrow. We have a question. Where's the notification button? It's shaped like a little bell. It should be underneath, down in the corner over there on the right side, I believe. But if you subscribe, you'll get alerts for every day at 3:30. So thanks again. Hopefully you guys are doing okay and keep drawing. Can't wait to see the artwork that you guys made. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.